Hello, everybody. My name's Helen O'Hara. Delighted to be back at EMF Camp, and please welcome back to the stage Stephen Slater.
Good evening.
And thank you all for sticking around. Wasn't that an incredible film? So inspiring. I just love it. I'm going to start with the basics. Tell me about, being an archive producer. How did you get into this? Give me the quick Cliff's notes. If anybody else wants to do what you do, how do they start that?
Oh, there's a wall of questions there. I mean, I think it's quite a misunderstood sort of term. I've worked in film production of some kind for, I don't know, getting on 20 years or more now. And I think it really just stemmed from an interest in, primarily being a documentary producer or wanting to tell documentary stories. I had an interest in space, which somehow has kind of led to this weird sort of niche. I produced and directed the BBC4 documentary about an unmanned space probe. And because it involved so much archive, and sadly I was not alive when these events happened, nor for that film, and so that involved like really immersing myself in the historical material, which we all need, as documentary filmmakers. It's like such an important. It's even more important than ever now with AI trying to take over everything. But we need the authenticity of that material, and finding the real material is really important. So I think it just focused an interest I'd had in trying to get all the best material of that particular historical event. With the Apollo being a real, focus, obviously, which I suppose that's kind of like the pinnacle of it. But there's many rabbit holes that I've been down over the years that I think is probably not suitable for this. Well, maybe it is for some of the audience, but yeah.
Amazing. And what was it that sparked your interest in the Apollo missions?
I think it was watching another film which is going to be here on 35mm, I understand, at the weekend, Apollo 13 at the cinema. So I saw that when I was 8 years old in 1995, and it's a wonderful film. I mean, it's such an inspiring story. The fact that it's like, my God, we actually did this. We as a species or as humanity did this. And I think you can never really say for certain what one thing leads you in a certain direction, but I think you're at an impressionable age when you're 7 or 8. So I think I go back to that a lot. Yeah.
It's an interesting one because it's kind of the power of art to inspire reality, to inspire these documentary films.
And it is accurate, and it is a very good film. It's a very accurate film. It's a movie, not a documentary, but a lot of the same things are going on there, I think. Although some people say that a lot of stuff in Apollo 11 is quite cinematic or feels a bit like a movie. I think especially the which I'm sure we're going to talk about, but the 70mm, that archive particularly is.
I do want to ask about that, but just first I wanted to ask about something you almost touched on there, which is, given that you know this much about the Apollo missions, can you watch, an Apollo 13, The Dish, anything else about them that's sort of fictional without getting irritated? Do you sit there nitpicking and going, oh, that isn't what happened? How dare you?
I mean, I find documentaries about the space program and Apollo quite traditionally. I find there's quite a high bar when it comes to watching that, and that's not meant to be a criticism of them. I think it's just the fact that when you immerse yourself so much in a subject, you can see the obvious mistakes. I mean, I say I'm more forgiving of movies because, I mean, the Dish is an example where it's about the Australian efforts to I'm sure some people here would have seen it, to receive the television of the moon landings, which was received in Australia. And although, I mean, it's a lot less accurate than Apollo 13, but the sentiment, it's a movie at the end of the day, and the sentiment, so many more people know about that story because of that film, that movie, and I think, I'm really for things like that, as long as people understand that it's a movie and it's a documentary. But I mean, that's probably like a film school kind of discussion. But
absolutely.
No, a lot of documentaries do irritate me about about the moon landings, but I'm not going to be naming names.
No, absolutely not. I wouldn't ask you to. It would be wrong. But you mentioned the 70mm footage, so that is a really key part of why this film looks as gorgeous as it does. Can you tell me about the process of getting that and finding out what was there?
Well, as I think I sort of said in the intro, it was quite a serendipitous. I think that's a phrase. Discovery, because we'd done a short film, which I'm sure not many people would have seen, called The Last Steps, which was. It was actually premiered at the Hampton Film Festival in pretty obscure, 2016, and it was just about mankind's last landing on the moon, but it was done in this same, and that was actually how I met Todd, the director, and it's one of these things where, as you say, I had become accustomed to working on quite a lot of. It wasn't the first time I worked on a film about the moon landings, but and you don't, your expectations aren't necessarily high, but when the final version of that film came through, I was absolutely like blown away with the music, the care taken to the edit, the structure and everything, and I then suggested after the screening, I'd done a lot of work, particularly with the mission control footage, restoring the sound or syncing the sound to that footage, which is worthy of probably 10 hours of conversation, very boring, no social life, that kind of thing. And I said, because the anniversary was coming up, we should do something in the similar style. But it was not like founded around that footage existing, because we didn't know about it. But the whole, if you've seen The Last Steps, the structure is very similar, or the idea with no narration, just have the audio and the footage from the mission and no interviews, nothing retrospective. And it just, because I thought that worked so well, I was like, well, I'm sure we can make that work for the 50th anniversary, which was coming up. And then it was 6 months into the research phase that we got this email. This showed up from the National Archives alerting us to the existence of all of this 70mm footage. And it was like, I had to sort of do a double take, because I was like, well, did they really just say that? And then, my God, how do we look at this? How do we get this into the film? Or how do we scan it, view it? Which is a whole, making of story. But that it wasn't, the basic structure was there before we found that footage. And then when we found it, it like opened up. It's like, this couldn't just be a big screen production. It could be an IMAX film because of the quality of the film. And we were sat in the scanning room when that footage came in, and it was the footage of the crawler taking the rocket, and it was BWOW, which meant the footage was upside down. And it was like, well, not only have we got the 70mm footage, but we've got aerial footage of the. So they were shooting this stuff from like an aerial, and it became clear, like, this is something very, very. I mean, I'm still surprised when I see it, and hats off to those cinematographers for filming that. I have
a question in here, which
Sorry.
I'm just trying to find in here, which is, sorry, it's gone. Yeah, thank you. Thanks. I have a question in here I'm just trying to find, but it's, do you have a favorite shot? Is it that one then? Is it the crawler that's your favorite shot in the movie?
Ooh, it's hard. No, I think, what's my favorite shot? My favorite sequence of shots are the people on the beach at Cape Kennedy, as it was then. Just the ordinary people watching, getting ready, sat down with their station wagons, mobile homes. You see those hairstyles, and it's not like people have described. When you see kind of footage like that, it's sort of like a time capsule. But I think it's like time travel. It's actually time travel. It's like that's how beautiful the cinematography is of that footage. The launch, I think probably the launch of the Saturn V is awesome. I think that might be my favourite shot in cinema history. It's like this panning shot of it, of it lifting off. Some people really knew what they were doing when it came to how do we preserve this and shoot this? And we didn't know about it for 50 years, nearly. So.
Sorry. That is incredible. That question came from Paddy. Thank you, Paddy, for that one. I also have a question here which I think relates to some of what you were saying about processing this footage and kind of getting this all together, like from Clive. Hello, Clive. Was it all done film to film, or was there a digital stage used? So can you tell us just about, because you had a lot of sources, so we may need the Cliff Notes version because there is another film at 9:30. But how did you put all this stuff together?
I had a very large collection of all the 16mm film. So that's everything that was shot on the flight. Almost everything that was shot in Mission Control, which had no sound. So I'd spent years trying to sync the sound to this footage. And then the 70mm footage all had to be digitized from scratch because we didn't know about it. And then we had to, I'm not taking credit for this personally. We had a team called Final Frame in New York who had to actually made a custom-built scanner to scan all of that footage. So they scanned all 200 reels of film. It's like over a petabyte of data. I think that probably means something to people here. Over a petabyte of data, because it was all scanned in like 8K resolution. That's the main bottleneck, was getting all that, being able to scan that and use that. The other material was, there was some bits and pieces that we transferred, but by and large I already had all that material. So the new element was the 16mm or the 70mm, and that was film to digital, scan to digital, and by some kind of geniuses who know about that kind of stuff.
They really do. Oh, I'm back. Hi. And also, because you mentioned the music before, we had a question from Andy. How much of the soundtrack is original and exactly aligned with the footage?
What about the footage? The footage?
Well, aligned with the footage, so I guess that's about you.
Yeah, it's all... it's composed by a brilliant composer called Matt Morton, who also did the score for The Last Steps, and his philosophy was, he had a Moog synthesizer. His philosophy was to only use music that made by instrumentation that existed in 1969. So I say it's a Moog synthesizer, or everything you hear could have been made at the time. Ooh, that's cool. Which it's very cool. But it's also I just love the soundtrack. I could I have that on listen to that in my car a lot. I think particularly the saying back there, because I just came back. I have seen the film many times, so I didn't actually sit all the way through. I came back in just around when they were having there's a shot with filmed by Michael Collins as the lunar module sort of makes its way up from the moon, and it's all done in one shot. And there's Matt's music. It's like a bit like Moonlight Sonata. It's my favourite scene in the film, and I think it's all because of the music. So look, I love the music. I'm a huge fan, basically. Yeah.
It's gorgeous. Michael Collins always seemed like a fascinating figure to me, just because he's there on his own, orbiting the moon for 2 days, and if a tiny thing goes wrong, that's just it. He's just stuck there. It's an incredible story for him, I think.
He's I think the most eloquent of the astronauts. There's a book called Carrying the Fire that he wrote, which I think is the best astronaut memoir. If anyone's into memoirs, that's worth, because he's incredibly self-deprecating, very realistic about it, and also I think there's a lot of false mythology that's been put into it. He's like, well, people say he was the loneliest person ever. Well, no, he was he could communicate with Mission Control. It wouldn't have felt like that, but of course, he was by definition the most remote, person. There's a picture that he took of the Earth and the lunar module, coming into dock, which would have been taken around when that footage was shot, and he actually comments in the book that all of humanity is in that picture. The 2 people in the spacecraft and the 6 billion, or I think it might be 4, but it's a lot less than it is now. Yeah. Is all in one picture, except the photographer, which is him. So. Yeah.
So he is the loneliest man. Come on.
But it's not. People want to put like a mythology on it that that wasn't true. I mean, Ron Evans and Al Ward and Ken Mattingly, they were alone for, I don't know, 46 orbits on the last 3. They were alone for a lot longer than him.
Yeah.
But mainly they were doing science, and they were doing that kind of thing. They weren't contemplating their existence.
That's it. That's exactly.
It's like people think that astronauts, all they ever do is look out the window and, but actually it's kind of, there's a lot of stuff to do. Yeah. There
is quite a lot. I think that existential question, though, does bring in some of the stuff that people have asked about, which is, the importance of this kind of documentary, especially in an age of AI, especially in an age where people, I would imagine everyone in this room's parents has at some point sent them an AI video not knowing it's AI. But, there are people who just don't know the difference anymore. So does it make films like this feel more important and more kind of urgent to preserve this stuff, to restore it, to put it in a form that people can see?
It's so important. It really is. And I mean, AI wasn't really, I suppose it was on the horizon, maybe just about on the horizon when we finished this. But now, I mean, it's everywhere, and it's invading documentaries that I've either been peripherally involved in or worked on directly. I mean, there was one film which actually animated a still of an astronaut and made it moving, and they don't tell the audience that they're doing that. And it's like, well, why was that necessary? It's like we rely on the authenticity of this material is like so important. And maybe you could get AI to generate some of those shots of the people on the beach, but would it have any value? And it would have no value, because it's like it has no value. But in my view, I mean, maybe I'm fighting like a losing battle. I don't know, but I don't think people want to see AI. Like I'm quite passionate about this.
Yep.
Leading the charge.
Quite right. We've got a couple of questions here about the amount of footage that you had. You obviously had difficult decisions to make. So first of all, Lee's asked how many hours didn't make it into the documentary. And Rebecca asked, what else did you find in the archives and couldn't include but found other noteworthy?
I mean, because the decision was made to focus on the 9 days of the mission. I mean, people probably got an idea that all they were ever doing was filming. So there's not that much footage. There's not that much, I suppose, particularly 16mm film. They didn't shoot that much because they're trying to save film. They don't have that much film stock with me. They've got to be somewhat disciplined about that. So, I mean, I think probably almost every frame of film they shot on the flight is there. On the ground, it's a different story. Obviously there was a lot in the build-up. But again, people were, when you're shooting on 70mm, you're not just shooting the floor all the time.
You're being very selective.
People are selectively shooting, so it's not like there's a whole wealth of stuff that we didn't use. I mean, by far the biggest reservoir of material is something called the 30-track mission control voice recordings, which we had access to for this film, which is. Basically, we had access to all of the mission controllers' conversations throughout the flight. So at any time, if they're keying on a loop, I say and that's 11,000 hours of audio, which in a human lifetime wouldn't be long enough to kind of listen to all of that. But we found, I mean, and the only way to interrogate it was to listen, and but we had. Particularly our producer, Tom, spent a lot of time going through it. And so he would find things like where you have the controllers. Oh, did you see the story about Ted Kennedy on the news? And then it was like, well, obviously that has to be in the film. I'm sure there's so many other little things you could build scenes around, possibly. But it's like, we don't want to have to use AI. We don't want to have reconstructions. I mean, one very good example, and it's funny, it's been in the news this week because Buzz Aldrin has just auctioning a pen, which there was an issue actually when they were planning to lift off from the moon, where a circuit breaker or a button got knocked out of the panel, and to fix the problem, he literally jammed a pen into the ultimate sort of do-it-yourself kind of solution, and. Use that to kind of, and that allowed them to fire the engine for them to take off from the moon. But then, when we look at it from a documentary perspective, and Todd would be the best person to tell this story, but there's no footage of them deliberating over that. What would you illustrate it with? We don't want to have to show stuff from other missions or something so actually, however, and I think the audio wasn't that dramatic anyway, but that's why documentaries always, I think, work best when you have these constraints, because we're constrained by, however dramatic it might have been, there wasn't a good way of illustrating it. Although actually I don't think it was that dramatic in that case anyway, but it's like there's got to be a way that you can, if it's all archival, we can't just make stuff up. We've got to, in my view.
And this was always going to be archival. There were never going to be talking heads. There was no discussion.
And I think other films have done that well. Mm-hmm. I think, well, certainly now, but even by the time we were making the film, the astronauts were in their late 80s. One of the astronauts has since died. But also, regardless of that, it's a different style of film. I think it didn't need it, did it? I don't think it didn't need. And people's memories are very different. It's like we've kind of got the real thing, so it's like, what's better than the real thing?
Yeah. Question from Sebastian: how much restoration was needed for the footage?
Well, the thing is, the National Archives, it's a good question, but the National Archives actually did an amazing job preserving that 70mm film. And so, not as much as you might think, but actually, the answer is a lot. To make it look as good as it is. But it's not. This isn't a case of colorizing black and white footage or footage from. I'd be surprised. I mean, I'm sure you can shoot better now, but Christopher Nolan's, I'm sure is better shooting better stuff now, but it's not much better than that. It's. You mean you're more of a cinephile than me? I mean, how does it compare to I think Lawrence of Arabia, they used it's the same kind of stock they were using for that film. So, but the thing is, they were forward looking. They knew, someone at NASA knew this is going to be important. Yeah. We're going to document it properly.
It is important. Also, the Odyssey rocks. Go see the Odyssey in IMAX. But I'm not paid to say that, but I just loved it. But the NASA thing is interesting, because you've mentioned a couple of times we got this from NASA, we got access to NASA. Yeah. How does one get access to NASA's archives? Are they out there? Are they, online? Do I have to write a letter? How do I do this?
Oh, God. You have to have no social life at all.
Done. I'm totally all over it.
It's a really interesting question, because a lot of people say to me, well, NASA Archive, it's free, isn't it? It's in the public domain. And the answer is that it's free in a sense that it's decreed, at least now. Who knows what's going to happen? But at least for now, the US government has, it's in the public domain. It's like a gift to humanity. So all the Artemis stills you can download, you can use them in your documentary, you can do whatever. But it doesn't mean that they're going to facilitate all of your requests, So I suppose, in a sense, I've made it my livelihood in a way is to understand the processes for accessing that material, for building relationships where I need to with people, but the other thing is that we're lucky in the sense that we have an organisation like the National Archives where all this material is preserved, and ultimately there is kind of a process for accessing it. But whereas more current departments, let's just say the current NASA, like in Houston, for example. There's a lot of bureaucracy involved. I mean, I worked on a film about Sally Ride, who was the first female US astronaut. But I think because a lot of that material was more recent, it's just more, I think people just think that, this is a filmmaker sort of thing, but people think that NASA will drop everything to support their latest film. And they're like, well, actually, we're building rocket, we're going back to the moon. We're kind of busy with that kind of thing. We need to leave the history of it to, and it's true that the history of it has been outsourced a lot by, private individuals or, people with a lot of time on their hands.
And no social life.
Exactly.
But that's really interesting. Is there less footage of the shuttle era missions? That does more. Exist as well. Okay.
No, I mean, no. they've done a fantastic job of documenting things. There is. It might not be as well known or as accessible. I mean, I say part of my job is to try and make this stuff more accessible through. I'd love to see more things, made about it. I mean, art. I mean, let's move on to art, and we can talk about Artemis. But at least there's been a more documented process of how all that stuff's been gathered. So I think that's going to be easier. And I know people who are involved in. We were talking. If by the way, if anyone wants to see the 9-day version of this website, a colleague of mine, actually, he worked on the film, Ben Feist, has set up a website called Apollo in Real Time, and so literally you can log in like right now and see it and hear exactly what the astronauts were saying. You can go to any one of those 50 plus audio channels, and it's like that's the 9-day cut of our film. The thing is, we haven't even had time to listen to all of it. So we've even got a forum where people can find interesting moments. And I mean, there's stuff where astronauts, wives are called by the controllers, and it's a remarkable historical document that all of this stuff is there and can be searchable. And actually, we're going to try and expand this to. The idea is to do all of the Apollo missions eventually, but that's going to be a few years, I think. So.
Yeah, this took 2.5 years, was it, to make? Is that about average for this kind of?
Well, sorry, a documentary, 2.5 years plus whatever I'd done in the build-up to. I mean. It's a very tedious thing, but syncing all the audio to the mission control footage. I mean, that's like that. I've spent so many days in a darkened room trying to kind of, because we had the audio, but we didn't have, none of the cameramen had, it's kind of what you'd refer to as B-roll, so that the cameramen would just go into the room and start shooting, but they didn't clap aboard it, there's no sign of when they started and stopped filming. So I'd literally go through it and look for when someone was talking, and then I'd try and find it on the 11,000 hours of audio. So, as you say, it's always going to come back to no social life.
No social life, yeah. Good God, it's an incredible undertaking. I'm fascinated. There's a question here from Lawrence. Did this footage teach us anything we didn't know about Apollo 11? But is it those kind of details in what people were talking about?
I think that 30-track audio. I call it the 30-track audio, the flight loop control audio. That's the most valuable historical resource. Well, I say to come out of the film, but in a sense, we've brought it to more public attention. But people are going to be looking through those sites for years and finding, because who's got the time to go? I mean, I say human lifetime's not long enough to listen to 11,000 hours of audio. That's the most important primary source. But I think it's like again, I'm coming back to the stuff of the people on the beach. I didn't know that kind of footage existed. It's like it opens a window culturally for me. But I don't know. It's like I'm not sure. Maybe I could ask you. What do you think those as a cinema to cinema? Like, what's the value to cinema of that stuff?
I don't know if anybody else thought this, but looking at the faces of the people on the beach watching for the rockets, I felt like that was a formative memory for Steven Spielberg, like that generation of filmmakers who would have watched that as children. And if you think about, people talk about something called Spielberg face, which is the moment in his, certainly sci-fi films, where somebody's looking up at the mothership or in awe or whatever. And that's what that felt like. And it felt like that came from a core memory of his childhood. I feel like that, when I saw those shots in this film, I hadn't seen this film before, but it felt like that was what I was looking at. It felt like I was watching Close Encounters of the Third Kind, or I was seeing the end of E.T. or something. It just felt like that came from the same source.
I hadn't actually thought about that. Particularly the end of E.T. It's similar, isn't it? It's
just looking up and thinking the universe just got bigger. Like our world has just changed forever.
It has. Yeah, it has changed. It's they're great shots. Yeah.
What's it been like for you as an Apollo geek, if you don't mind me saying so, to watch Artemis and to see humanity go back to the moon?
Well, first of all, I mean, I've
near the moon so far.
I'm Ben, who designed the Apollo in real-time sites. You know, is a very good friend of mine. Is a member of the science team, and so I've sort of through him, I've been able to experience what they're doing, and you know, and how they're documenting it. And I think, you know, it's inspired what we did. Well, I say what we did with Apollo 11, but ultimately it's him and his, you know, those sites. You know, but I suppose that's, sorry, I'm talking about how they're preserving the memories of the mission. That's one aspect of it. For me, watching it, you know, it's amazing. It was very emotional. I got a lot more interested in it than I thought I was going to be, because amazingly enough, you can get kind of desensitized to some of this stuff. But it's like, I think we were saying just before we came on stage, it's kind of the space program generally just showcases the best of humanity. It's the best of, it's like what we can do when we're at our best. And you know, it was so, wasn't it? It was such an inspiring thing, seeing that, and think people got really wrapped up in it. I mean, I'm sure you did.
Oh, obsessed. Yeah. I also saw Apollo 13 at a formative age and was... Yeah. And it just, I can barely watch a rocket take off without crying. I just find it so inspirational. And people who remember Challenger as well, you know, it shaped all of us, I think. But
Apollo 13, again, it's what could we do? How can we solve problems when we're at our best? You know, it's the best of. There's kind of nothing. I don't think there's anything cynical. There's nothing cynical about it, really. Yeah. It's and I don't think there's anything. What you could argue what's about the kind of what the scientific value of it was. I mean, for me, it's all about the, you know, the inspiration that it gives to people. For that, you know, as well, you know, even however many years, 57 years, you know, afterwards.
Absolutely. Listen, we have to finish up. So apologies to Stuart, Veebs, Germany, and Marcus. I didn't get to your questions, or we covered them in other issues. But most of all, thank you all for staying, and thank you to Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you.